Coming up on UGTV, Standing Committee Meetings of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. A meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. This will be followed by a meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee.
The meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. I would say at the beginning that the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee that is normally scheduled on this evening after this particular committee has been canceled. It will be rescheduled with those agenda items put on the next committee meeting. We welcome everyone to the meeting. Public comment is welcome. Anyone wishing to address the committee on any item may do so. When that item is up for discussion, you have up to 3 minutes to state your comments. Please come forward to the microphone there at the podium and you'll be recognized. For recording purposes, we ask all present to speak directly into the microphone. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Roll call. Walters.
Here.
Regia. Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Walker.
Here. Next, we have the minutes from our May 1st meeting. Is there a motion for approval?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes have been approved. We only have one item on the committee agenda. We'd ask Chris Slaughter of the Land Bank to step forward and present this item, please.
Good evening. I guess we'll get right into it. I have a little presentation for you tonight. We have 10 applications on the agenda tonight. One is a property application, or property acquisition, excuse me, that's a typo there, and 9 yard extensions. All applicants are current on their taxes, have no code violations. First property we'll talk about is the property acquisition. It's for Dan Gaines. It's at 2201 North Halleck. And Mr. Gaines' house is located right there outlined in black. In this, we have an application for the top and the bottom properties on North Halleck. There's the other one. This one's more on the one on the north. The other yard extensions are 1520 South 8th Street, which is located right over there. 1216 Orville Avenue, 3036 North 32nd Street. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong address. It's 3205 Wood Avenue. They're in your packet. 903 Osage, 905 Scott, 2946 South 36th Street, 1872 North 28th Street. Met with the advisory board. They were fine with everything, asked everything be approved and forward for final consideration.
Does anybody have any questions, concerns? I'll entertain a motion.
I just have one question. On 903 Osage,
Yes.
it says that it's Oliver Small Engine. Is it the company that is requesting a yard extension or the owner of the company?
It's the owner through the company. They purchased 907, which is right here next to their shop here, I believe.
That's 911 right there.
Yeah, and then 907 is here, so they've already controlled that, and now this is the property in question that they're asking for.
And so it is just to maintain that property, not to, I mean, they'd have to go and get further.
I don't
permission.
understand. I don't believe there's any like expansions or
Okay.
anything. They requested to put it in the tax sale, and it finally made it in the April sale.
All right, that's fine. I would move to approve all as submitted.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and second. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Next, we have donations.
We have one donation, 244 Highway Avenue. This is a request that the city of Bonner actually first received. The property is located there, outlined in black. It has a couple setbacks that make it really difficult to build on. The Bonner Springs Housing Authority owns property right next to it, so the goal would be is to get it to the land bank, and then we would eventually transfer over to them. And in the meantime, the city of Bonner has agreed to maintain the property, so we'll make a request to approve that donation.
Move for approval.
Have a motion and second. Please read the roll.
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Well, that concludes our meeting for tonight, folks. For those in attendance or watching that on TV, we'll be holding a budget workshop, which will prove to be equally exciting. I'll turn it over to the mayor to take control.
Way to sell it. Commissioner, you set a high bar for excitement on meetings, so we'll try to match it. We'll try to match it. We do have our budget hearing. This is our first budget hearing. We had the presentation last Thursday, and for the next couple Mondays and Thursdays, we have a series of budget hearings. This is our first workshop. We will have, well, I'll ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll, and then I'll give some background.
Has been called for Monday, July 10th, 2017, immediately following the EDF Standing Committee meeting for a budget workshop. Roll call, Murguia. Here. Johnson. Payne. Here. Markley. Here. Walters.
Here.
Philbrook.
Here.
Bynum. Here. Walker.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan. Here. Holland.
Here. So the agenda's been passed out. You'll note on the agenda that all of the items that the commissioners have requested for topics have been filtered through here. There's a couple of reasons for the order. One is staff time, to make sure they have time to make adequate presentation on each topic. So we've tried to scatter them based on perceived workload for our staff, but also to balance the meetings. We have left the last two pretty open. So if we need to add more topics as we go, we do have space. So we front-loaded them with the requests, and we will work our way through those. So we have tonight's, you can see at the top, and then under future workshops, July 13, July 17, July 20, 24, and 27. So a lot of topics to be covered, but we're going to start with an overview. And then the one item, for our special sessions and our workshops, as you know, we don't do motions and votes during special sessions. They have to be published ahead of time. We do have one published vote tonight that has already been noticed up to the public and to the commission, and that's to set the maximum mill levy. And we will talk through that tonight, but that's our first order of discussion, and then we will move into the rest of the topics. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bach and have you walk us through this.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. And I think first order of business really was just to cover the agenda. The mayor has done a good job of walking through that. So as he's noted, we have each day laid out here, and then some open time for additional discussions that'll come up as we go along. Tonight's emphasis is really one to make sure the questions that were asked regarding the numbers in the budget, how we pulled everything together, how that impacts the taxpayer within the community, both from a residential and a commercial perspective, where we go in terms of fund balance at the end of the day, how we're doing things regarding star bonds, and really some of these broader questions, some of the discussion about the overall mill rate. We wanted to make sure we had the discussion on those items tonight, and that way if there was some change in direction or anything as we move forward, we'd have a good understanding from where we're going in that direction. But we're going to start before we go, and as the mayor said, also setting of the maximum mill levy. But as you all recall, that's just one that says this is as high as you go. You can always bring it down from that point, but this allows us to get us published, and then we can move forward and stay on track if we'd like to through this month. I'd like to start, though, with our budget director, Reginald Lindsay, and have him do, as he usually does, kind of walk through the budget book as it was presented to you. And he's going to touch a few highlights as we go through it and give you an opportunity to ask any questions if there's anything that's come up about the ordering of the budget or document as you've had it since last week. Reggie?
Thank you, Doug. Good evening, Mayor Holland and Commissioners. I'm going to step through the budget document. The budget document is available online at the Unified Government's website. It's also available on our interactive financial site, OpenGov. There's a PDF out there on OpenGov, and also you can interact with the budget on OpenGov. Also, there are hard copies in all our local libraries within Wyandotte County. First part of the budget document is a table of contents, which will kind of lay out everything that's in the budget document for you. Next section, we have the county administrator's message. There you can find the message as it went out last Thursday when the budget was presented. Also, you can find the budget presentation that was in a PowerPoint form. Also, there's the commission's values, goals, and guidance. There we can find things like the org charts, vision statement, also the mission statement, and also the values and goals. Also, this is a view of the org chart. There's one internally for the staff, and then there's one for the elected and appointed officials. Also, we have the community profile, which gives a history of Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas. Kind of tells what the form of government is, also the major services provided by the unified government, and also community characteristics. In the budget overview section, we have information such as the budget calendar, budget policy, and also the different steps we take to go through a budget process yearly. And we have the financial overview, which provides a notice of public hearing for our different funds that goes out into the ECHO and also other means of communicating with the public. We also have expenditures by fund and mill levies. We can see we have, it shows the budget for the 2017 amended budget along with the mill levies, and then also the 2018 proposed budget along with the mill levies. These here are the tax levy funds, and here are other funds. This right here is a view of the general fund. This is what the general fund page looked like last year in the budget document. We recently got a new budget software called Questica that allowed us to update our budget financial pages, and this is what the updated budget page looks like. The former page was produced all in Excel. This page right here shoots straight out of our new budget software. Within our department, Judd Knapp, he worked really hard on this particular fund statement, made it really efficient and effective. Next section we have our department expenditure budgets, and we also have a new page here that is part of our new budget software. This is a new addition that the budget staff also worked on. It kind of breaks out each section within the budget document. So here, for instance, here we have community services, and we have a pie chart for community services to show how much of a percentage it is of the total budget. And then also we break it down a little more where community services, we show each department within this section of the budget document. And again, this is a new addition that we were allowed to do with our new budget software that we recently put in place. Also within the department budget section, we have narratives, give you highlights of the departments, what they plan on accomplishing in the upcoming year and what they've already accomplished. And here's another new document that we have in the budget document. We always had a financial page, and this is we had a little color to it and kind of highlighted the years that we're concentrating on, which are our amended and our proposed. And then also down here at the bottom of the page, we kind of concentrate and show what's new in this particular department's budget. So each department, if they have something new in their budget, as far as operating budget-wise, it'll show up down at the bottom of the page here.
That slide's on page 47.
Our next section, which within the budget document, is the capital section. And here we concentrate on the different policies within the CMIP, and also we have a schedule for our capital projects and also our capital equipment. Next section is our grant inventory, which kind of breaks our grants out into state funded, federally funded, a combination of both state and federally funded, and also private grants. Our appendix goes through our financial policies and our position inventory and our employee paid benefits. And here's a view of our position inventory that's broken down by full-time equivalents. So each department, you can see what their full-time equivalents are, the type of positions they have. And then we also have another view of full-time equivalents, which is by fund, which we talk about a lot as far as the tax levy funds, the special revenue funds. This breaks it down and shows like how many FTE are in each fund. This document right here breaks down how much the unified government pays for its employee paid benefits. You can see what we had in the budget for the approved budget in 2017 and 2017 amended budget, then also the 2018 budget. One of the things we can see here, it kind of shows where Health insurance is going up 14% from 2017 to 2018, and we can see that here. And most everything else stayed pretty much static, but the health insurance jumped up 14%. Any questions on the budget document?
All right, well, everyone probably has questions about what's within it in the contents, but that's the ordering of it is. If there's any questions about how it puts together or where anything is located, please don't hesitate to ask so we can direct you to that as soon as you can. Next item in the for the workshop this evening is the discussion regarding the maximum mill levy. The maximum mill levy, which I presented in the proposed budget, sets forth a mill rate for the city of Kansas City, Kansas at 39.875 mils, which is 2 mils less than what is approved in 2017, and then at the county at 38.813, which is the same mill rate that was adopted for this year, and then the SMID district sets out the same of where it's been, and then the library stays constant at its mill rate. I'm recommending that you establish that as the maximum mill rate. I believe this budget contains what needs to be, so unless there are other items you wanted to add to it over and above this mill rate, I think that can establish where we're at from a maximum. As noted, you can always lower the mill rate as you go through this process over the next month.
Commissioner Walker.
As I read the charter, the commission's primary and virtually sole responsibility is to adopt a budget, establish what the taxing rates will be. I will express that I am personally and as a commissioner not satisfied with a simple 2 mil reduction. I understand the idea that this is a maximum mill levy and that we can always reduce it, but I think my opinion is that we need to send a message that we're going to reduce. The people of this community deserve tax reduction. They've been promised it for I don't know how many years. Maybe we can go at it a number of different ways. But to my way of thinking, we have more revenue than we had the previous year with a 2 mil reduction. What, 13 million more? 15?
Not over the entire budget, including our enterprise funds. That's not all in our taxing.
So we are spending more money than we spent in previous years. And at the same time, we're reducing 2 mils, which for most people is an insignificant amount of money, quite candidly. I feel that our maximum mill levy on the city side should be at least 7 mils lower. That is a total of 7, 5 more than the proposal of 2, and that the county should see a smaller reduction of 1 or 2 mils. If we don't make ourselves do it, you're never going to do it. It's about what the people out there in the community expect. They just got clobbered by the state with higher income taxes. I admit that the state legislature was in a difficult position of trying to balance a budget. They had to do something, but the bottom line is people are still going to end up paying more. I think we ought to be able to forego at least 7 mils on top of what's, well, 5 more than what's been proposed. Because I don't see anything in here where we're making any supreme sacrifices thus far. And that's where I'm going to stand on this. If you want to call it a motion, I'll call it a motion.
Well, I want to say, I think we need to, I'd like to follow the administrator's recommendation. We need to walk through this budget document. We've got raises on the table for our entire employees, all of our employees at 2%. That's at $3 million. We take 5 more mills out. I don't want to, unless we're going to reduce the number of employees. 80% of our costs are personnel. unless we're going to reduce the number of employees, and I'll remind us that 60% of our employees are public safety. So unless we're going to take out the raises for our employees, we have almost $4 million in increases in our cost of health insurance that we have no control over. Almost $4 million additional. And that's those two alone. The cost of living increase for our staff is desperately needed. And the health insurance increase, those alone represent almost $7 million. That's 7 mils right there. And that's with asking all of our departments to take a 2.5% decrease already. So if we're going to take people out of positions, if we're going to reduce staffing significantly to accommodate an additional thing, I think we need to do that over the course of these sessions and not tonight. Because if we decide we can't reach the 7 mil goal, then we have to completely republish and start our budgeting process over. And we're under constraints by the state of Kansas about how we do that. I think setting the maximum mill levy at the administrator's recommended level is the wise move today. And then we have several weeks, Commissioner, to address how and where we would remove an additional 5 mils if that's what we want to do. But I don't think we can do that tonight without predetermining that we're going to cut staffing.
Mayor, I respect your opinion, but I'm making a motion. And if I don't get a second, I don't get a second. This is where we make a motion.
All right.
You've made your argument. It's a cogent argument. I respect you for doing it. I'm making a motion that we reduce the mill levy by 7 mils on the city side and 1 mil on the county side.
All right, I do not hear a second. That motion dies for lack of a second. Is there any further discussion on let's stay on the Kansas City, Kansas portion, on the city portion. We have to do 4 different motions. Is there a motion or a comment on the city?
Well, I'd have a question in regard to Commissioner Walker's comment. Commissioner Walker, is your motion just directly to reduce the mill levy by 7 mils, or since we're setting the maximum mill levy, are you saying you want to set that maximum mill levy tonight 7 mils lower than it is today?
Well, 7 total mills, 5 more than what the administrator has proposed in his budget.
So even if there's no second to Commissioner Walker's motion, if we set the maximum mill levy at what it's at right now with a 2 mil reduction, as we go through this budget process and we can find 7 mils to reduce, we can do that at the final hearing, correct?
We can go down. We cannot go back up without republishing and getting us off of schedule for our budget.
Okay, so then I would just make a statement in regard to Commissioner Walker's statement. I agree, Commissioner Walker, that I think our constituents deserve a significant property tax reduction. But for me, it's premature to lock ourselves into a 7 mil reduction this evening without hearing our staff and our administrators' recommendations on the budget. I just know from the 10 plus years I've been on the commission, at the end of the administrator's proposal, he's never been left with extra money. He's always been asked to find additional money to do additional projects. So we, as collectively as a commission, if that's what the focus is, I know it'll be my focus, then it sounds like Commissioner Walker's focus. We all need to keep that in mind when the public steps forward with special interest projects. They could be very good projects, but we need to keep in mind what the priority is. And if you're not willing to focus on reductions during this budget and only willing to focus on spending more money on additional programs or even keeping it the same, we're not gonna get there. So I will do my best to remind people in the most respectful manner as we go through the budget, myself included, that we can't lower the mill levy if we aren't going to find it's approximately 1 mil for $1 million.
Approximately.
Okay. So if we can't find $7 million to take out of the budget, then I don't see how we have a balanced budget. I would also say this. I think, Mayor, you just said that 80%, am I interpreting this right? 80% of our taxes is spent on employees, correct?
That's right.
And the money we bring, 80% is. So what that leaves us, and correct me if I'm wrong on this too, Administrator Bach, that leaves us 20% for supplies and materials. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I appreciate everything that our staff does. But what I'm concerned about is that what can we actually do in our county? What can we actually see? How many roads can we lay? How much curb and sidewalk can we put in? How many sewers can we improve? How many buildings can we improve with 20% of our total budget? I'll just leave it at that. So to me, that's a pretty elementary way to lay it out for people that don't sit up here every day and kind of know how the budget works. Tell me again, Administrator Bach, our total budget is how many million?
So we're recommending $357 million.
And so what's 20% of that?
Yeah, about 70.
So we have $70 million. Okay.
That includes special enterprise funds. So if you,
Your mic's not on, sir.
but we don't even have that much
We
because
don't.
when you really consider this, we're talking about the consolidated general funds are where we have the majority of our money to do projects like you're suggesting.
Okay.
And then you're down to 210 million or somewhere in that
Okay.
ballpark when you
Right.
get down to that piece.
So not to get too far in the weeds, I know what you're saying, Commissioner McKiernan, but when you're in 70 million for the average person, 65, 70, you just throw it around at that point. So we have $70 million, and I just would like my constituents particularly to hear when they call me about a road improvement, they call me about curb and sidewalk improvements, sewer issues, water runoff issues that I hear from other districts. We only have 70 million to stretch that out throughout 10 districts. So that's not even, what is that? That gives, if you divided it by district, that gives each district $8 million, approximately, unless my math is wrong, $8 million per district to spend on actual supplies. So I'm not advocating by any means to keep the mill levy here. I'm going to be looking for ways to cut costs also, but I just want it clear to the people that are out there that that's about $8 million per district.
I would also like to note, we lowered the mill levy 2 mills last year, and we are proposing another 2 mills this year. I anticipate continuing to lower the mill levy in Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, and Wyandotte County. What I don't want to see are two things. One, when consolidation first happened, there was a major cut in the mill levy that turned out to be unsustainable, and it went right back up 2 years later. I think that was a bad idea. The other thing that's happened, we saw in the state of Kansas, are some very irresponsible tax cuts in the state of Kansas that proved unsustainable, and they virtually bankrupted our state. And so I think the key that we need to do is I think we need to be on a path of consistently commitment, a consistent commitment to lowering the mill levy overall. I think everyone on this board has that. I've not talked to anyone on this commission who says we should be raising the mill levy. I hear everyone saying we need to consistently lower it. I believe we need to do it in a responsible, methodical way. And we did 2 last year. Again, 2 this year will keep us on the right path. And we need to do more. There's no question that we need to do additional reductions in our mill levy. And the number one way we do that is by growing the value in our community to take the burden off of those who are here. So growing value is going to reduce our mill levy, and we are doing it, and we need to keep doing it. So any further discussion? Commissioner McKiernan.
I completely agree, actually, with both of you. We get to the point where it's very hard at this point. I think the smart play at this point would be to set them a maximum mill at 39.875, which is the administrator's recommendation, and then, as Commissioner Murguia said, look hard over the coming 5 weeks for places where that could be trimmed, and if we find them, we trim it. But I agree with you, Mayor, that the way that we really get after this is we have to grow the number of properties that have value that pay taxes.
That's right.
And a lot of the incentives that we use to increase the vigor of our community and to set the groundwork for future growth, unfortunately in the short run, don't pay the full load of taxes. And we do that intentionally so that we can grow our community, but it's a long play.
That's right.
And so I would move that we set them a maximum mill as recommended by the administrator at 39.875.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
It is moved and seconded to set the Kansas City, Kansas mill levy at the administrator's recommendation at 39.875. That is a maximum mill levy that could come down in the next several weeks. I don't see any further discussion. Roll call.
Roll call. Murguia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Kane. Aye. Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Walker.
No.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Motion carries 9-1.
All right, we now have the Wyandotte County portion. Mr. Bach, do you have any presentation on that?
Mayor, I'm recommending that we maintain this at the current mill rate of 38.813, and I'll keep in mind that this moves us forward with a major infrastructure project in the building of a new juvenile center, which we're looking at starting construction on throughout this year, coming into next year. Doing such a facility typically is one where you go out and you ask for special mill rate. I know any major project like this in the past in the county has been done that way. We believe we can do this through the savings and efficiencies we're making within the county and the growth that's happening within that mill rate, and that's why I'm recommending we keep it at this level. This is also a area where our fund balance is at about 5%, where our stated policy is to get it in excess of 10. So I would not recommend going lower than this at this point without determining a different methodology for how we would expend our money.
Any discussion or a motion? Commissioner McKiernan?
Well, I would make the same motion as before, that with the intent that we will look for budgetary savings between now and final vote, that we set the maximum mill as recommended by the administrator at 38.813.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Seeing no further discussion, roll call.
Roll call. Murguia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Kane.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Motion carries 10-0.
All right, the Self-Supporting Municipal Improvement District. Mr. Bach, would you like to remind us how this works?
Sure. This is the downtown. Did you have something different? This is the downtown improvement district that's set forth. It's pretty
Why
much
do
a
we just vote for it?
self-imposed,
Excuse me.
the county mill rate.
Keep it the same?
Yes.
Actually, I wanted to interject. We should have put in 2017 that it's 11.3, and what they're proposing is to increase it back to 12.5, where it was before.
I don't know.
Kathleen, our CFO just pointed our chart on the wall is not correct. In 17, the mill rate is 11.3. And I believe, as you will all recall, we had quite a bit of discussion on this last year. We entered into a new agreement, worked this through with the downtown shareholders, who are a big group that work with the SMID. And their request to come back is that we set this at 12.5. This is a tax that only applies to those businesses in the downtown area that are part of the SMID district.
And they asked, the businesses themselves have asked for this increase, is that right?
Did we hold a public hearing on that?
We did, and they changed the boundaries and the amount. There was quite a bit of discussion, and we had supported their direction, and they had the support of their businesses to do this, so.
And the last question, Mayor,
Yes.
is there any property tax dollars in that fund, or is it solely funded from the sales tax of the businesses?
No, this is all property tax.
It's all property tax.
So they self-impose a higher property tax on the businesses in those areas in order to fund this.
And only in those areas, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And they've agreed to that?
Well, they've come forward, that's the request of the association, that they work to do it. And
Okay.
They had to have signatures and agreement of a very high percentage of their group to get that done.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's also in a separate fund. It has nothing to do with the general fund. It's entirely separate.
Got it.
Right.
Thank you.
We don't work those expenditures.
They reduced the western boundary from 18th Street down to
12th Street.
12th Street.
That's right. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded to take the administrator's recommendation of 12.5, which is the request from the downtown shareholders. Roll call.
Roll call, Murguia. Aye. Johnson. Aye. Kane. Aye. Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Motion carries 10-0.
That brings us to our final vote on the maximum mill levy, the Wyandotte County Library. Mr. Bach?
This is the requested mill rate that has been submitted to us from the Library Association. We really don't have any oversight within the operations that go on in this area, though we're the ones that have to establish the mill rate. So this is the request that has been brought forward to us. We can set this as a maximum. If there was additional conversation or such, we could look for it, but I don't have a lot else to tell you on this.
Commissioner McKiernan?
I would just move, as we've done with the others, that we establish a maximum of 6.059 as recommended by the administrator.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, the motion is seconded. Seeing,
I just had a question for Administrator Bott. Can you briefly remind us all what that money is for? What do we spend it on?
I'll probably ask the finance team if they can go through and do it, because we, as a unified government, don't really expend it. It's that association. So if I can ask you guys to go through the breakout, because there's a difference between USD 500 oversees the library operations, and they provide some administrative oversight to it, and then the library boards dole this out.
The levy provides support for all the libraries within the county and Wyandotte County, so that would include Bonner Springs, Edwardsville, Turner Library, and also the KCK Library.
So if the USD 500 pays for the administrative costs to run those libraries, what does this money pay for?
So this is funding outside of the KCK funding. It's just for, so Bonner Springs does get a portion of the KCK library. So this goes to provide funding for that, and also it does provide funding to the KCK library, which in turn funds.
Yeah. And maybe to clarify, they have the administrative staff that does it, but I believe they are paid a percentage that goes back to them. So they'll bill like the library board for their administrative staff that's are assigned to work in the libraries.
we have easily the most unusual structure of a library system in Wyandotte County, because it overlaps with the KCK District 500, it overlaps with this commission, and it overlaps with the library board. So we could do a special session on this if you'd like to understand the library, because it might be worth our time to understand it some more, but I'll just say it's as complicated as it sounds this evening.
Just asking because it's 6 mills, pretty close to what Commissioner Walker is asking for. So I was just asking what we're spending it on and what we get for it.
I think we could add that
So
easily to a special session.
It's not part of our budget at all. It's not part of our general
And
fund.
so I can discuss it with staff. I'm not sure the general public is interested, but for myself, just me personally, I'm not requesting a special session, but I just don't understand why, if the USD 500 is going to manage the libraries, then why are we collecting the taxes to pay them to manage the libraries? I've always wondered that for years.
I think we should. I think we should bring that to a session, because I think if we have questions about it, I guarantee the public does, and I think clarifying that for the public would be beneficial.
Even if it isn't part of our budget, it is a mill on where I live, where
Right.
people live in Bonner, where other people live. And so if it's not necessary, it's just because it's not in our budget, I mean, I'm still paying it. I guess the question is, what am I paying for that I'm all for libraries. I love libraries.
So,
We don't have enough. We don't give them enough. But we ought to know what we're spending our money for.
So I just wanted to point out that the total assessed value for this library district is much smaller than the total assessed value for the entire county, because it encompasses a much smaller area. So the 6 mills actually generates around $3 million. So just so you know.
Let's just bring it to a session, because we're going to need to understand this more. Commissioner Filbert?
Well, so he's already said some of it. She's already said some of it. And yes, it's very complicated. And just because we don't set the mill levy, it doesn't mean that it doesn't impact everybody. And so I think people have a right to understand what that 6 mills is going for.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
I mean, because we have to pass it through. What would happen if we didn't? I mean, I'm sorry. I know that's kind of a flip question, but if they're in control, then what would happen if we didn't pass it? So I want to understand it better. So thank you very much.
All right, we will add it to the list for a future session. During this budget period, we are setting the maximum mill levy, so unless someone wants to propose setting it higher, I have a motion and a second to keep it the same as the maximum. Seeing no further discussion, roll call.
Roll call, Murguia.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Kane. Aye. Markley. Aye. Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Bynum.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Motion carries 10-0.
All right, thank you very much. And as I think it's been stated several times through this conversation, those are the maximum mill rates that we would be able to move forward with. As we go through and you're able to dig in and analyze through the budget, you're able to find different efficiencies, different directions we want to go, then we can always finalize a mill rate that's lower in the different categories. Up here are primarily the top 2 on the list, being the city and the county mill rates. And I think also has been mentioned, to be sustainable, it's finding reductions in the mill, or reductions in expenditures, which will be year over year, and not be reductions. We come out and just say, we're going to spend $1 million less on capital this year. That's one time. Next year, I still don't have that money. I still need the capital if the intention is still to do what we have. So sustainable reductions are really driven in the area of personnel most of the time, because it's a decision to stop doing something that we're doing today. And that's the kind of thing we need to think about as we look at different ways to redirect that. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's not stop it, it's just do a little less of it or something like that. All right, so the next section that we go into in the this evening is really starting to answer some of the questions that are out there, and those are regarding the budget process and the revenue and where it comes from, and some of those impacts then as they come back onto the users the way we set this out. So I'm going to turn this over to Kathleen Von Atchen, our Chief Financial Officer, and she's going to walk us through a few different sections. We'll break after different areas. We'll go into the budget area formation if you have questions that you have about that. Then we'll get into the revenue forecasting, and we've got a few things as we go through there. So Kathleen?
So the budget process, and specifically for tonight, revenue estimates, is a never-ending cycle. We start out, we prepare this budget for you, and then at the end of July, we ask for your adoption of the budget. But then after that, our budget team and all of the departments go into budget implementation mode. We're out there implementing the initiatives that are funded by the budget. We evaluate our initiatives to see whether they're performing according to how we expect, and then finally there's a financial audit process, and then we start the process again with the financial preparation. So, revenue forecasting is a key component of the balanced budget, or of a budget. The other thing that's important to note is that it's the challenge in presenting a balanced budget, balanced with especially on those operating funds like the general fund and the other tax levy funds. Those are operating budgets, and so we want those revenues and expenditures to equal each other. So oftentimes, just some things to look for when we're looking for deficit reduction, that will catch up with you is, for example, if we have unrealistic revenue projections, we need to also factor in those things that are only one time versus ongoing. I think we've had a lot of conversations about that because of the STAR bond. Also, it's probably best not to kick the can down the road, because if you've got a challenge, it's probably better to face it straight on rather than waiting until next year. And then we want to also, when we're doing the budget, we review the fund balances at the end of the year to look at our financial picture, but we're also looking forward, but we're also trying to keep an eye on the big picture, right? So on revenue estimating, first off, we want to take a look at what is the baseline. How much can we spend without anything changing? Then we look at financial forecasting. It's one of my top jobs, one of the most important tasks I do. But it allows for to do the forecasting. It allows us to be more proactive rather than reacting to problems as they come. We can kind of foresee into the future where there's potential budget imbalances. Also, we're all working together on a long-range financial plan and strategic and policy direction so that we anticipate what things are coming down the road that we can address before they hit us. So naturally with revenue estimating, we try to be as accurate as possible, but even the private economy is not 100% known. So those revenue estimates we have, sometimes they come in as we expect and sometimes they don't. So we do the best we can. Financial management without trustworthy revenue projections is just not meaningful. So we try to be conservative, but then not too conservative, right? And I'll talk about that in a little bit in a minute. The forecast assumptions, as we've talked about as part of the long-range financial plan, is based on a number of drivers, economic drivers, such as CPI and the unemployment rate. We also look at demographics and indicators such as population growth, and then just changes in administrative laws that inhibit or change the amount of revenue we can collect. So overall, it's we collect a lot of information, and it all goes into that revenue estimate. Best practices, we use our professional judgment, economic forecast, we look at historic trends, and then we also look for policy restrictions. So as I mentioned before, we try to keep it as easy and understandable and transparent as possible. We have put in place a structure for our revenue estimating team, who I'll talk about in a minute. But we want to either be conservative, but then and objective, but we want to kind of strike a balance between those two. And for example, if we're too conservative with our revenue estimates, then it leads to kind of unnecessary fiscal stress because we're cutting back on things that we could do in the future, which later on in the year we find out that the revenues were coming in as better than we expected, and we could have done all these things that we ended up not doing. So, we don't want to get into that situation where we're being too conservative. Because then there's that loss of opportunity for service improvement. But then on the other hand, we want to just stay objective, meaning we want to project revenues as accurate as possible, but understand the risks involved in doing that. So they could result in projected program reductions at mid-year if we end up projecting things that are if we overestimate our revenues, we might end up having to make changes in the middle of the year. But if we provide some contingency funding for those sorts of occurrences that aren't anticipated, then and we continue to have strong financial management policies in place, then we are able to withstand those sorts of possibilities. So I just wanted to point out here that we have a revenue estimating team, and so I'm at the top, and what I do typically are the property tax and charges for services and sales tax. I work very closely with Debbie Pack, who is our treasury manager, and she is assigned to assist with property tax and motor vehicle. My deputy CFO, Debbie Johnsher, over here looks at utilities and other revenues. Reggie and his team are also very involved in various departmental revenue projections. And then we also utilize the information we get from other department staff, and as well, especially Elise Villarreal, she also helps us a great deal. So it's a whole team of people that are involved in revenue estimates. But ultimately, I should point out that once we project and have a finalized review of our revenue estimates, we pass those by our county administrator. And of course, he and I go through and talk about the base assumptions and factors involved in all these revenue estimates. And, he might have some suggestions for things to look into. And it's a give and take situation, but ultimately, all the revenue estimates are reviewed by our county administrator. And so that there's a timeline here where, we're looking at the revenue team is looking at the revenues back in October and November. We're meeting with departments to review assumptions for the future year. And then we work on that long-range plan. In the future year, we'll be looking at that long-term financial forecast for the future year. February, March, we're incorporating that information into the long-term plan, presenting that plan to you, as well as including those revenue estimates in there. April and May, the revenue team is working with the departments to update the near-term revenue estimates just for this coming year, not the out-year ones. And then June and July, that's where we are right now. So we're looking at the revenue estimates, and then we're presenting those as part of the county administrator's proposed budget. And then in August and September, we monitor revenue performance. So a great deal of focus is placed on the general fund budget, because that's where a great number of our resources and service delivery occurs. Naturally, and that totals $219 million, right? So yes, the total budget for the unified government is up in that $350 million range, but that number includes all the enterprise funds and a lot of other funds that are not included in this specific general fund. The consolidated general fund is where all of the tax-supported activities are occurring. So, and this is the pie chart of all the various revenue sources. You see 28% of it is property tax. Then you go around, franchise tax is 18%, sales tax is 17%, other taxes are 21%, charges for services is 6%, and so on. All right. So overall, the general fund.
Commissioner Walker.
Mm-hmm.
Franchise tax, is that where you're putting pilot?
Yes, that is pilot, yeah.
Does your budget make any recommendations on reducing pilot?
No, sir.
So, for clarity, Administrator Bach, so what we really get is 20% of the $219 million that is spent on the services that I was talking about earlier. $219 million is the real dollar amount.
Well,
not the
when you talk about the general fund portion of it, it would be that 20% what comes in through here. You still have 20% in other components of it, because part of it would be like the water pollution control. So that's not a general fund portion, that's a separate fee-based area. So it has different operations come, but nothing's funded from that, from the general taxes.
What does 1% of pilot represent, approximately?
It's $3 million, right?
Yes, a little over.
So what's the total amount of money that we collect from fees annually?
Charges and fees in the general fund is about $12 million. if I remember right.
So we collect, and those are restricted fees, correct?
No, they're not restricted. They're collected in order to pay for general fund services.
So I'll go back again. This $12 million plus the $219 million is the total amount of revenue that we collect.
12 million is included in the 219.
Actually, yes, that's partially right. Actually, $9 million of the STAR bond money, which is dedicated just for the two general funds, is within the 219. So the total revenues of the general fund are 219, all right? 10 million of that is actually a reserve for annual appropriation. It's required by our bond documents.
So what was the other money you were talking about, Administrative Body?
So
The enterprise funds?
the enterprises funds is not part of this number here.
And so like in water pollution control is our biggest enterprise fund operation. So that's what I'm talking about. We buy equipment, infrastructure within that enterprise fund. So effectively it's 20%. It has money outside of it.
Do
So
we have a variety of funds?
yes.
Oh my gosh.
We
So
have
what is
30,
the
we have
annual?
30 funds,
We have how many?
30.
So we have general tax fund, and then we have other funds, and then we have fees
Well, no
that are
fees.
part of the general fund.
Yes, right.
And so the fund, like the enterprise fund, what's the total annual revenue from the funds that we have?
Well, if you go to page 46 of the budget document, they're all listed here. And so overall, all the kind of tax-related funds, all the kind of tax-related operating funds that totals $261 million. All those other type of funds that are supported wholly by their own kind of fees is 80 million. 80.
Page 46.
So those funds that are, where their fees or their revenues are restricted include certainly the sewer system, which is $40 million, the sewer system, as well as the stormwater system, the street and highway fund, which is wholly from state revenues. Kansas state revenues that are shared with us. What else here? Then, of course, the travel and tourism, which is a transient guest tax, and also the dedicated sales tax, which is about $10 million that in sales tax that we collect dedicated solely for police and fire and infrastructure needs, and then emergency medical services, which is 11 million. So there's quite a few funds where they're just supported by their own fees. Yeah. So the general fund.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Okay.
What that says is that I misspoke earlier when I said that it's not the 351, but it's the consolidated general funds. It's about halfway in between, because some of these funds truly are dedicated and they do not yield money that we can spend on our budget priorities, but it's not as low as the consolidated general funds.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was a little low in my estimate earlier.
So overall, just generally speaking, the consolidated general fund, if you back out the $10 million for the debt reserve, you got about $210 million in revenue, right? And 80% of that is spent on personnel, and the other 20% on supplies and consulting services and other capital outlay and those sorts of equipment replacement. So the biggest, as you see from this chart, right, the biggest revenue source to the general fund that supports all our operations is the property tax. And so there was a number of questions that, have been raised, from all of you during our meetings and during the budget presentation on the property tax. So I've got a couple of slides here that I'm going to go through and kind of walk you through a little bit to provide some additional information. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have, so just fire away at will. So I wanted to provide you here, this slide shows the certified property tax valuation released by the Office of the UG Clerk on June 12th. And this means this is the certified assessed valuation of our county and the city of Kansas City, Kansas. The top one is the county, all right? So I'm providing last year and this year so that you can see the comparison, right? So what she provides is the existing values and then the amounts that for each respective year that were new improvements or remodels. And then you see the category utilities. Now utilities is actually assessed by the state, not our county appraiser. And then you have personal property, all right? So, and so they certify the mill rate or the assessed value in the prior year in which the tax occurs, right? So in the first year it says 2016 total assessed value for the 2017 budget, right? The next column is the 2017 assessed value for the 2018 budget, all right? Now I don't have this broken out by residential and commercial, but we're going to show you a little bit more information on that in a little bit, all right? But this is straight out of the letter, the official letter that we got. And what you notice here, the next column is the variance, right? And you notice that in the variance column, they're not all positive numbers. Sadly, our assessed value declined in several areas. You see at the county, the utilities declined by $11.5 million, and personal property declined by $11.5 million. So the total assessed value, although it increased for the county side by 2.5%, which is in that next column, it would have been higher had it not declined in those two areas. Now the second set of numbers below is actually a subset of the numbers above, right? Because the top ones is just the entire county, and the second set is Kansas City, Kansas, right? And so that's why they're lower, because they don't include Bonner Springs or Edwardsville or Lake Quivira. And so most of those declines in utilities and in personal property occurred in Kansas City, Kansas area. So the decline was, impacted Kansas City, Kansas AV more so. And so that's why the declines, or it only increased 2%.
Commissioner McKiernan.
So remind me again what utilities reflects.
Well, those are properties that are owned by utility companies.
Okay. So the value of properties owned by
yes.
the utility. And if
yes.
Kansas City, Kansas is a subset of Wyandotte County,
yeah.
how can the Kansas City, Kansas number be effectively larger than the county number?
Well, no, the county number is 80.1 million, and the utilities in Kansas City, Kansas is 72.
I'm looking at the variance column. Oh,
well,
never mind.
Probably because...
What a moron. I just did the math. Okay.
Yeah. No, I kind of asked myself that same question, so, yeah.
Can you take it a step further on the utilities?
Yeah.
You said that was assessed by the state. Is that correct?
Yes.
On the properties that are owned by the utilities?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And the reason for that decline was?
Yes, well, we did call the state, and what we learned is that there was one company who was acquired. Oh, actually, the company, they do it on a national level. And so this company actually acquired several other utility companies, in which case their total asset value grew significantly. I mean, by 8 or 9-fold. And as a result, the percentage between the amount that they they owned in Kansas was diluted because of how big the asset value had grown. And I think maybe do you understand what I mean by that?
I understand. I thought maybe it could help the listeners at home, but I don't know how much that might help them. That's all. But at least we know why. There is an answer.
The key is
it is one company.
When our residential or our values go up between residential, because existing values, is that residential and commercial?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So when residential and commercial goes up an average of 3.8%, but utilities, which is big, plummets 12%, it nets us out at 2.5% up. So when you think about it's relevant to our previous conversation about the maximum mill levy. If commercial had not dropped off 12% like it just did countywide, or almost 14% on the city, we certainly could have looked at maybe another mill or two reduction because we would have gained additional revenue. But our revenue went down on the utility side significantly and has capped our ability to reduce our taxes on the residential. Mr. Bach, is that accurate?
Yeah, that is right on, Mayor. I mean, and unfortunately, that's the reality. A resident may see an increase in valuation, but that doesn't mean we see identical to all different forms of business, particularly utilities. And maybe just to take another stab at answering your question, Commissioner Johnson, it's Kathleen, as she said, the utility is valued on a national basis. And then overall, something happened within their portfolio that they said, instead of being, let's just use simple numbers, 100, we're now going to make you 80. And while nothing significantly happened in their percentage in Kansas, they come back and just prorated the portion in Kansas down by that. And I guess my number should have been from 100 to 88. So they just prorated them down by 11% in Kansas and affected it across. So nothing happened here that changed, except for we got the negative results of what happened on a national scheme for them as a corporation.
And I am aware of the company. I just don't think we're allowed to divulge it. That's why.
It's just amazing that a single company could have that impact.
Pretty big.
Yeah, their asset value increased to $1.4 billion from, their total asset value nationwide increased to $1.4 billion, where before it was only $400 million. So.
Commissioner Philbrook?
Yeah.
So bottom line is, it doesn't matter what the property is worth. Let's just act like it's a house or something. The property's value really is not different in its entity. It's the percentage for the full amount of houses, let's say.
That's right.
And so then there's absolutely nothing we could have done about this to foresee the issue, but still get pinged big time because of the state laws. So I'm whining. Sorry, I'm whining that we lost for no reason other than somebody else's gain.
That's right. And it shows the complexity of the world we live in. We have no control over those issues.
So this next table is basically just to kind of walk you through how the property tax revenue is calculated. It came up as a question. The top one is 2017, and then the second one here table is 2018. So we can focus on the bottom one if you want here, if you don't mind. The bottom one here, you got 2018 mill levy. That's based on the budget. So this is the mill rate, the maximum mill rate you just set. And by the way, this is only the general fund portion, all right? So the amounts you set included all of the other tax levies as well as the debt service. So this is just the portion of the total mill rate you just set that is dedicated to the general fund, right? So that total, so for the county general fund, it's 31, and then for the Kansas City, Kansas general fund, it's 23. So the assessed value is shown there. You can see that it's the same amount that I have here. You can see 1.2 1.2 billion and 1.083 billion.
Do you have a laser on that?
How do you do that? You just hit it here. Oh, all right. Okay. All right. So that 1.2 number is the same as that 1.2 number, right? All right. So now, basically, you would just do the math. Which here's the math, right? You take the mill rate divided by 1,000, and then you multiply by this assessed value number, and that's how you get the $37.5 million. But that's before we apply a delinquency rate. So we have to apply a delinquency rate because there are a number of property tax owners who are unable to make their property tax payment.
Or absentee landlords who just choose not to pay it.
And we can't count on that money coming in, because if we did, then we would be overestimating our revenues, which I mentioned earlier is not a good thing to do. And so as a result, we take a delinquency, so we back out the number. In this year, we're going to use 5%. So I want you to know that the budget, we've been budgeting 6%. So we dropped it to 5% because more recent information has led us to believe that our delinquency rate is declining. So
it looks like it was decreased from 7% to 5%. Is that right?
Yes. Well, the actual delinquency rate was around 7% last year, but we budgeted it at 6%. So, yeah.
So could I ask you a question about that? I understand our tax sales and the emphasis on having more properties in the tax sales has resulted in us collecting a lot of back taxes, several $1 million. So where does that money show up in this chart?
Yeah, okay, so all the delinquent revenue, delinquent property tax revenue is reflected in a separate object code and is not included in these numbers. It's in a, but yeah, and we're tracking that too, by the way, so.
I want to point out our delinquent tax rate, in part because of the SOAR initiative and other proactive things that this commission has done, moving from 7% down to 5% is almost a 30% reduction in delinquency, which is huge. And we need to continue to move it. The national average is what, 2%?
Yes, it is.
So our goal is to get down to 2%. So we have more work yet to do. But this is the first time in the 10 years I've been here that number has moved in the correct direction. And that's excellent work.
Yeah.
So Kathleen, is that number that you say you're tracking separately in the general fund revenue total?
It is, yes. And actually, you can see its history if you go to page, I'm going to tell you real fast. It's probably on page 89 or 90. And it's delinquent tax is what it's called. So I did want to point out that all these property tax revenue numbers, you can find them on page 97 of the book. And it's across the entire, all the funds.
So where is it? Page 89 or 90?
It's on page 89. If you look at the second line is delinquent tax.
Oh,
That's the city
delinquent tax.
general fund. They're separated by each
Right.
fund has its own set of revenue.
Right.
So that one is, the one on page 89 is just the city general fund.
So you can see it in 2018, we're expecting that to
Yeah,
be
second line down.
So it's fairly
1.4
constant
million.
over time.
Yep.
$1,500,000, $1,200,000, $1,500,000, $1,450,000, $1,400,000. Actually less in 2018 than 2017. A little bit. Right?
That's what we have.
Okay, that wasn't my understanding, so I'm glad you pointed that out.
Commissioners Philbrook and then McKiernan.
Well, actually, my question was just yours. Does that get recovered into the general fund? And clearly, it shows it does. Does it make sense then that if our initial uncollected goes down, then this delinquent tax that is recovered could similarly go down. There's a smaller pool of uncollecteds to try to recover from. Because it looks like over the last couple of years, we have a delinquent tax that is actually decreasing from 1.5 to 1.4 to 1.3. And is that in part because our collections are better at initial bill and we're recovering more, or is that not related?
Well, it's hard to know. The thing is we have we're now doing 3 tax sales and not just 2. So, but sometimes it just has to do with also if we've won some appeals, and it varies quite a bit.
Thank you.
I think the other thing to note, and we'd have to break these down a little bit more, but I believe the actual accounting for where we go, if you look at our tax sales, or we increased the number of houses that went into it, 700 homes went into it, 600 were redeemed beforehand, so those actually turn into property tax collected. So that increases our property tax number. And Kathleen, I think we'd need to go verify that breakout, but there's a different way of when they come back and pay those back versus when we take it through the tax sale and then they count down as a delinquent tax sale piece. So our numbers that are actually selling at the tax sale are the same or actually lowered a little bit because more were redeemed as we went through that process.
Yeah, as you can see on page 89 is the city delinquent tax revenue. In 15 it was 1.5 million. In 16 it dropped to 1.25 million. In 17 I have it coming in at 1.45 million, and then in 18 1.4. So and that's just because I didn't want to overestimate it, want to be conservative. It did drop down in 16. Actually, the county number is higher, with it's trending around the 1.7 to 1.8 level. So,
thank you,
Commissioner Philbrook.
Well, things have shifted since I originally asked. So basically, what you're saying is we're much better off if we get that money, the redeemed money, than a possible less amount of money at the tax sale. So we get a higher percentage of money. Is that what you're saying? Erp?
Well, I don't think we get we get a higher percentage in the sense that you get 100% of what's due.
Right.
There are a few cases when properties are not redeemed and they go through the tax sale that we collect more than what we're due on back taxes. Well, no, never, because we may sell it for higher than, but we don't collect that money. If there's 10,000 back taxes, it sells for 15, 5 goes to the delinquent property owner, and that's state law. So you're right. It's either going to be at that amount or less if it goes to delinquency. There is hope sometimes that we go through the delinquent portion of it, we get it into better hands.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Sometimes we're hoping you don't pay it.
Get it out of their hands.
I hear you. But I did want to say that I really do applaud our administration and the commission for letting and encouraging the people to do this SOAR initiative, because this has been something that is sorely needed. Oh, sorry, Mayor. I know it's only fair. After all of those, that we've really been needing for a long time, and we're happy to see people know how to come together and put this into action. It'll be really great to see how things look in 5 years from now, that we're maybe down to that whatever low percentages that other people have, that low 2%. And so at that and higher values on our property. But other than that, thanks.
All right, so one other thing that we were asked to do was to kind of calculate, how do we get to the one, what the value of 1 mil is. So what I've shown here is for the city general fund and then for the county general fund, but it's the same methodology. So we have a total budget on the top, and I'm referencing the budget document here, so you can refer to the number. And then the ad valorem property tax revenue, that's calculated, for example, in 18 at $23.7 million for the city general fund. So gee, if you take the percentage of the total budget, budgeted revenues, and come up and to the total amount of tax revenue, it's 15.5%. And then you add in that mill rate that we just talked about, which is only with respect to the city general fund. That's $23 million. That includes that 2 mil reduction that we just agreed on. And then you do the math basically, and you come up with a total revenue per mill of $1,029,000. So that's how much 1 mill is in the city. And then below is how much 1 mill is in the county. And that one's high. It's a bigger number because the county assessed value is much higher, or not much, but higher. So so that's how much the mill reduction costs. Okay. So this is a chart that many people have been interested in taking a look at. Basically, what we're doing is just looking at Kansas City, Kansas. And here's that revenue, or that residential and commercial breakout. So for Kansas City, Kansas, what we've calculated based on, we've looked at all that assessed value that the county clerk certified. We backed out any revenues or assessed value related to TIF districts, tax increment financing districts, because any amount of revenue generated for those is set aside in another fund to pay for the improvement for which we bonded against, right? So that can't be counted here. And so we take that out. We also adjust for any kind of appeals. And then based on all those kind of adjustments, we figured out that the residential assessed value was 5.16% in 18. That's what we're expecting. But commercial only increased by 0.87%. And so we've applied that percentage. And so if you own a $100,000 home in Kansas City, Kansas, you should expect to have a property tax, the property tax bill you're paying right now will be, because of the increase in assessed value, $47.89 if there were no mill rate decrease, no change in the mill rate. You would be paying $47 or $48 more. But because we reduced the mill by 2, you're now actually paying $24 more. So the difference between those two is roughly $24. So the property tax mill reduction we're recommending in the proposed budget saves residential property owners $24 per year. On the commercial side, unfortunately, the mill reduction results in a dramatic reduction in the property tax, partly because the value of the property that we're looking at now is $500,000, certainly. But an average property of $500,000 with no mill reduction would pay $87 more with no mill reduction. But with the mill rate reduction, they're paying $165 less than they would have. So, any questions on this?
Can you go back one slide? The 23 mills on the city general fund, we set the maximum mill levy at 39.875 on residential. And Commissioner McGee, I think this speaks to your question about how much we'd be reducing it. If my math is correct, we have 23 mills, which is the city general fund income.
Yeah.
And about 16.8 mills, which is debt mill levy. Is that right?
That's right.
So the 16.8, we have to cover our debt fund. So we can't cut the 16.8 mil. So if we were to reduce additional mills from the city, it would be coming off of these 23 mills. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, that's very important. Thank you.
So, and you can see here that it was 25 and now it's 23.
Yes.
Right? And the other 16 is paying for our debt service on the capital improvements that we've done in the past. So, any questions on this? All right, so one last slide about the property tax. Now, it's kind of fun to look at how did the revenue estimates compare with actuals in property tax over the past 10 or so years. And of course, you know, we had a number of CFOs. Lou Levin was the most recent one, but there were lots of other CFOs. You can see that for the most part, we were very close on the estimates. With, you see, there's the budget column for the property tax, the ad valorem property tax, and here's the actuals collected. This is that difference between the two, and then this is the percentage difference. And the percentage difference ranges from 0.1 or 0.1% to 2%, roughly. So it kind of ranges. And of course, during the meltdown, during the financial meltdown, it was very difficult to predict this revenue source. You can see how dramatically it jumped around. So.
But even with that, our financial forecasting has never even been off 2% since in the last 10 years.
Right, and certainly in the last few years, it's been pretty good. So yeah, it's been pretty close.
It's been within 1%. Yes, Commissioner Bynum.
Kathleen, can you go back to the slides where you were talking about the mayor's point on that one, the 23 mills versus the total of 39, I think, in the city general fund? Because I thought the difference in mills included more than just debt service. I thought the 16 additional mills were other mill levy funds.
So you could go to page 47 of the budget document. Can you see it? So
my laptop died, so I'm sharing.
On the city side, it's just the two funds. On the county side,
it's
there are about
other mill levy
right.
funds.
There are about 7 or 8 funds.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the county side, you know, we don't list all of those different funds. We just give you the big number of 40. What is it? I forget now. Oh, 38. Oh, but here they are. Yeah, so it's the county, right, it's the county general fund, the consolidated parks fund, the bond and interest fund for just the county. And then you have aging, developmental disabilities, election, health, and mental health. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so anything else here?
Got it.
So last but not least, our state legislature last year, and they made revisions this year, passed a new legislation which we refer to as the property tax lid. And so as you know, basically what they have required is that we can't collect any more revenue from our property tax than can be then based on January 1st, 2017, adjusted for inflation, which is stipulated in the law. And I did want to, and then there's a whole slew of, you know, exemptions which we can apply, which specify different areas of the budget that can be exempted out from the calculation. We just wanted you to know that we have taken a look at this, and we are in complete compliance with this, and this is not a concern for our government. So,
could I ask you a question about that?
Okay.
You know, those other actions we took tonight, for example, the library fund, are they covered by this?
Yeah, actually, the library fund is specifically exempted from the property tax lid. Yeah.
SMID is also.
And SMID, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so as you know, this is year 2 of the 2018 will be year 2 of the STAR bond revenue initiatives. We've now set the base, so we know exactly how much money we're going to be getting in the future. You remember, so that base was $12.4 million, not just 12, but 12.4 million. And overall, so we just want to talk a little bit about this. We've already presented it at the budget presentation, but because of the 4 mil reduction, $4 million is dedicated for property tax relief. $2 million is for fire and EMS. SOAR is signed on for 1.6 million of the STAR bond money. Police and fire get 1.4, or police and sheriff gets 1.4, streets and neighborhood improvements 1.3 million. So you realize this $12.4 million, only 9.4 million of it goes into the general fund. The other 3 million is dedicated, required to be put into the dedicated sales tax fund. They get 1.8. And then the emergency medical services fund, which is, they get 1.2. So when we're talking about STAR bond money, what's really available to discuss about what can we pay for in terms of initiatives, it's really that 9.4 million that we're looking at.
I'll also note that when we did the listening tour and the survey and asked people how we should spend the $12 million, how we should invest it, 4 mills of relief, $4 million of that, a third of that 12 million going to property tax relief, is spot on for what the public said when they were given all of the options in terms of how they wanted to invest that money. So investing $4 million, a third of that STAR bonds money directly into property tax relief, is exactly in keeping with the listening tour and exactly in keeping with our public survey that we took last year. So I feel like we have honored the request of the public, and we have made true with those new revenues of offsetting our property tax with sales tax revenue. And I think that's something we should all feel very good about, that we were, if you look back at that survey and the listening tour, it varied between 2 and 4 million. And so we're on the high end of what was requested by the public. We need to do more. Everyone agrees we need to do more, but with that specific 12 million, we're spot on with what we had committed to doing.
So this slide talks about the importance.
Kathleen, before you go to fund balance, I think I just want to make sure, as we've talked about revenues and talked about the amount of money to the housing, there were just kind of varied questions that commissioners had, and I want to make sure as we move forward with the budget, everybody is good with what we've presented. If there's something else we've not made clear, and kind of as I looked at the questions that we had, it's kind of breaking those out. We were trying to show how much is paying difference per household. So if somebody gets a 2 mil reduction, what's the impact on them? So if you base it at 100,000, you can multiply it. If their house is half that or their house is double that, you can kind of see what the impact will be on them. Commissioner Walters, I think you asked the question about the numbers of houses that fall into those categories. So
yes, I did.
I think, and we can write this response back to you, but our best data for that is one which was done by the appraiser. And I'm going to ask Mr. Connor if you can. Actually. Do you have that stat up here?
Yeah.
And Joe, why don't you go over that and kind of show who's in which category of being less than, so we kind of get a feel for what percentage of the community will be at a lower tax rate, what percentage will be at a higher tax rate, and any, less than a couple percent.
This is the presentation that our appraiser gave to all of you in the spring before the tax bills went out. And so on that bottom table, in that pinkish color, the 2017, if you go from left to right, so 25% of the single-family residential value changes were no change to negative. So those people weren't going to get a tax increase with the mill rate staying the same, right? So when you go across the other, then 75% had a value change increase. And again, that's at the mill rate being what it is today. What's being proposed, and if you look at, it's kind of toward the middle there, the 0.1 to 5% increase in value, that was 20.4% of the total single family that was assessed. And so with the 2 mil reduction, it's probably going to catch the bulk of those. So when you add those two numbers together, it's about 45.4%. Sure. About 45.4%. This number here and this number here are going to probably see no change in their tax bill this year.
Or a decrease.
Because of their change in value.
Because
that's kind of a rough estimate, but they, of course, those that Those are, 5% and higher and moving up to 25%. Of course, they're going to see an increase in their bill, even with a 2 mil reduction. But generally speaking, if you're 5% or less with a 2 mil reduction, you're probably not going to see an increase. So again, that's 40. That totals up to 45%, almost 45.5% of the total parcels that are single family residential.
40, what'd you say, Joe? 40 what?
45%.
45% of them received a 5% or less increase in their value. So with a 2 mil decrease, their total tax bill will not be affected.
So 45% of our residents will see no increase or a decrease with the mill levy decrease we have announced already. Commissioner Bynum.
Well, to clarify, we'll see a no increase or a decrease on the city and county portions of their tax bill.
That's right. The part we can control.
The part that we legislate.
Is there I was just going to say, is there another part? Because I'm getting afraid right now.
No, of course, well.
We have another fund or fee or something.
There's the school district and the college.
I just meant what was under us. I was thinking, oh my God, I've been here for a long time. Hopefully I didn't forget.
In rough numbers, the unified government is actually less than half of the tax bill that people see, around 47%, 46%. And then half of that's county and half of that's city, rough numbers. So I like to say 25% of the bill is city, 25% is county, and then then you have the school district and the community college and the library that add up the rest of it. So we can only control 47% of the taxpayer's total bill, because that 46%, that's all we have legislative authority over.
Now, Joe's numbers are on the city side.
This is the city.
County side then would be parallel to what these numbers are. If your value goes up, you'll pay more in taxes. If your value went down, then you won't. You pay less.
So could I just clarify? She asked if this was talking about both the city and the county. It's just talking about the city, right?
Yes.
Everybody who has an increase of valuation will see an increase in taxes on the county side.
Yes.
So that's, I don't know what percentage of that is. With that, does your chart show that?
75%, sir.
So 25% will have no increase in appraisal value or a decrease?
25% are at 0 or less. So their appraisal was the same or it went down.
So is the property tax, I'm sorry to laugh about this because it's so hard to explain to people that are just regular people on the street. So what would I tell that the majority of Wyandotte Countyans whose taxes is going to go up when we reduce it? Do I say, well, you're just lucky you're not paying more?
I think the key.
I mean, I'm not trying to be funny, but well, we could really suck it to you. I mean, I don't know what else to tell them. I mean, I feel like they think I'm lying to them when I tell them that we reduced the mill levy and they pay more money.
I mean, the appraisals, I guess, are a market-driven tool that's used by the appraiser's office. And if you remember in her presentation, our home sales, especially single-family home sales, basically across the community, are skyrocketing. They're 10, 12, 15% higher than they were a year ago. And so to me, that's what your appraisal is based on the market. And it's the market's good in Wyandotte County. And so I know it's a hard explanation for people to hear, but that's what it's based on.
I mean, the other key is the median residential property value in Wyandotte County is $67,000. In Johnson County, that's $210,000. Johnson County has 3 times the number of properties at an average of 3 times more value. So the reality is, when they have an $8 billion total valuation in the county. We have a $1 billion total valuation. For every mill they levy in Johnson County, they get $8 million. For every mill we levy, we get $1 million. So Johnson County actually has half the tax rate we do, but they pay double per citizen on services than what we do. So they spend double what we do on every citizen because their values are so much higher. We're just much more efficient in terms of our spending because we have to be because our values are lower. The key is we have to grow values. I tell everyone, I want everyone's value to double, but I don't want your taxes to double. I want your value to double so we can cut your taxes down. But the value has to keep going up so we can reduce the tax rate. And I'm very clear when I talk to people, we can lower the tax rate. We can't control the market in terms of the value. And so in response to the value going up, we're reducing the rate. The key is we're so undervalued in our county until we continue to grow the economic development, until we reduce this blight. And Commissioner McGee, you've talked about this forever. The blight in our eastern portion is dragging down values in our entire community. Yeah, and McCrinn, Markley, I mean, everybody's talked about it. The blight in our eastern portion of our community, primarily eastern portion, we've got to address it because for quality of life, but also it raises the values. And that raising of the values allows us to continue to reduce the tax rate. And so it is complicated, but it's also, I think people understand the difference between the value and the rate, and we have to continue to talk about it. And in our community more than any, because our community struggles. And we also have the highest tax rate on folks with the lowest income. And we've got to get the rate down in a meaningful way over time. So it is hard. But I think this chart answers Commissioner Walter's question as to how many people are actually paying less in taxes.
It's just also, and I won't belabor it, Mayor, but it's just, how do you say what you just said when you're passing someone in the park and they ask you why their taxes is, why they're paying
That's
more?
exactly what I do. I tell them that whole story. I just wear them out with the whole, because it's very pastoral of me, right?
Does anyone ask you questions anymore?
No, they just start avoiding me. But here's the thing. There aren't easy answers to these. People want easy answers. Folks, this isn't easy. If it were easy, someone had already done it and taken credit for it. Right? Commissioner
I was
Markley?
just going to say that the appraiser, at around the time we had our little sit-downs, provided a follow-up email, and I know Emmerich has copies of it because he's gotten it for me before, that talked about the amount that other counties had gone up in valuation versus our county, and depending on how interested the constituent really is and how sophisticated they are and how deep they want to go into the discussion, I found that really useful to kind of talk about, you know, everybody else's values are going up too. We can't not have our values go up. It's important that our values continue to go up, and they're still not going up as rapidly as some of these other counties. So it helps kind of paint a picture, like a broader picture for them, so that they don't feel like, well, you're ripping me off and all these other counties are not doing that to their residents. And I can at least say, well, Johnson County's values went up too, and Douglas County's values went up too, and kind of paint that larger picture. Particularly nice if you're dealing with someone commercial and they're saying, I'm going to move my business because your values keep going up. You can say, go right ahead, but they're going up everywhere else as well. So, like I said, Emmerich can help you with that if you need a copy of that email.
All right, and I think that's one of the values of having these discussions on camera, so people can watch it and people can go back and watch it also on the internet and say, what was that discussion about property taxes? It seems very complicated. It is complicated, and
several times.
It gives all of us a chance to go back and watch it, but it does help clarify the difference between rate and value. The value is set by a state computer that we have no control over, that's based on inputs from realtors, based on arm's length transactions. We can't control that, and it's a metric that we just receive that information, and then we set our tax rate based on the valuation fluctuation. Commissioner Townsend.
That's a good reference chart. Where is this in our packet? Is it in the main body up here, or is it in this? That
Well,
would just be a good
we added that at the end, and I wasn't sure whether we wanted to include it as part of the printouts, but it's part of what we emailed you.
Okay.
So, and it's at the very end of what we emailed you.
Okay. That would be easier to carry around than the mayor, so he can be pastoral and explain this.
That's right. I'll travel. I talk about this all the time.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
It's in the appraiser's report that we have also.
It is, yeah. It's actually that one you can read, because this one, when we copied it, it didn't look you can't read it very well.
Okay. All right. Mr. Bach?
All right, so hopefully we've answered your questions in that regard, and we'll move to the fund balance area.
Right. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why it's important to have a fund balance or some reserves. We, as you know, we just did that CAFR presentation, and we achieved reaching the 10% of expenditures level, which is a significant achievement. And our credit rating agencies love that. It's an important piece of what keeps our credit rating at AA with S&P. We are just A with Moody's, and because they, well, basically they're concerned about our economics, you know, but we still have that AA with S&P. Anyhow, but most importantly, the reason we need to keep a fund balance, which with this proposed budget, our fund balance is 9% of expenditures, all right? So the general fund balance, or available ending fund balance that we're expecting to end the year with will be $18.8 million, and that represents 9.1% of total expenditures, all right? And the reason it's important to keep that 18 million there is because if there's any kind of economic downturn, then we will be able to tap into that 18 million in order to diminish any operational impacts of the organization. So what I'm saying here is we keep the funds in there so that in the future, if there is an economic downturn, which in the next 18 months, a recession is, I would say, more likely than it was if I was talking to you a year ago, okay? You know, a lot of talk has been about a potential recession. I think in the next 18 months, it's more likely than it has been in the past. So if a recession hits, we have that reserve, all those reserves in place, so that we don't have to go into furloughs, we don't have to do any kind of other reduced services, reduce the number of the hours of operations, or a whole slew of pull back on expenditures for the capital and for equipment that we've supported. I mean, we wouldn't have to do that. We could rely on that reserve. The other reason to have a reserve is if our jurisdiction is vulnerable to a natural disaster, right? So, boy, let's pray to God that we don't have a tornado go through our Legends area. But if we did, that reserve would be there just in case that happened, all right? And also, we need to have a reserve in place for if you're dependent on volatile revenue sources. So the sales tax, we're now relying a little bit more on our sales tax revenue, and that is a little bit more sensitive to the economy. So, and it happens a lot quicker with sales tax. If you have a recession, if it hits, it almost is immediately. Unemployment starts to rise, job losses occur out there in the private industry. People pull back. There's less consumer confidence. They stop going shopping, and boy, it hits quickly. It can hit within a matter of months. So we need to have those reserves in place in case that happens. So more sensitive. Also, if our jurisdiction is subject or maybe vulnerable to any kind of reductions in state aid or federal aid. So as you know, we are concerned, for example, with possible reduction of the CDBG federal dollars. Are we going to need to backfill that money with our own tax dollars? Will we continue to provide those services? That's a known vulnerability that we have. And then, as I mentioned before, we have a reserve, maintain a sufficient credit rating in order to minimize our long-term borrowing costs. And so, as I mentioned, 10% is very laudable, and the credit rating agencies they specifically say 10%. GFOA, they recommend for our size agencies that we have around a 16% of our expenditures. So that would mean that we would have to come up with, I don't know, about 6 or 7 million more in reserves to achieve that. And, you know, over the course of the future 5 years, that's something that potentially we, you know, if the governing body chooses, that's something that you could work towards. Any questions on this?
Yes.
Okay.
I had a comment more than anything else. So the 10% is the reserve in the city balance. Did I hear you say the other night that the county balance was 5%? Or did I misunderstand that?
That's right.
So when I'm talking about the general fund, I'm talking about the consolidated general fund.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't remember offhand how much the percentage is split between city and county, but
Okay.
The county general fund, or the reserve for the county general fund is less than the city, but together combined they're 9%.
5%.
At the end of 18.
Okay.
And the county is down there closer to the 5%.
5%. I guess what I'm kind of looking at, I think I brought this up the other night, is more of a strategy in terms of how we look at the mixture of encouraging property values to increase. Obviously, as the mayor has already stated, that's driven by the market. But as we continue to address issues as blight, that's already been brought up, infrastructure, things of that nature, that increases value. But we also, and then we measure, or we talk about that in light of the lowering of our mill levy. I'm also looking at reducing and managing our long-term debt, and I'm not completely opposed to debt, but I think there's a point at which you're overly leveraged, highly leveraged, and then also increasing and managing our fund balance, our operating reserves. Is there a dashboard that we utilize somewhere internally, staff, Doug, that kind of gives us a summative picture of those main things and how they play against each other in terms of equations and ratios that will kind of guide us into a 3 to 5 year path, so that we don't just have you throw up the graph about debt and we're going to just jump on that and we're going to have a bulldog discussion about paying off debt, but then, you know, we talk about fund balances, that's a whole nother discussion. You talk about mill levy, that's another discussion, but they all interplay. Mm-hmm. They're all intertwined, and I'm just wondering, is there a more of a summative dashboard approach that can help to guide that conversation and maybe even make our decisions a little bit, I wouldn't say easier, but at least to give us a kind of sense of where we're going.
Yeah.
Realistically.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so the answer to that is yes, there is, and I'm happy to provide that as part of what we were thinking about doing a long-term financial plan as part of your upcoming strategic retreat in the fall of 2017. But we can do it sooner than that too. So
I think it would be helpful because these are conversations that we're going to have every year.
Yeah.
And so if we have these things that are put out there that kind of help guide us and we can see them all, you know, this is where we ought to be. This is where we are in terms of fund balance. Here's our debt. This is where it's leading and where we're trying to go and how they all interplay. Our mill levy, and I don't know what else should go in that. You have it, so I'm just going to rely upon you to be able to provide that. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, be happy to.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to kind of do a little bit of a refresh or revisit.
Commissioner Murguia, did you have something before we moved on?
No, it can. I mean, it can wait. I'm still caught up in the couple slides before, trying to think it out. But I can wait for my question or my comment till the end. Okay. Keep going.
So this is just to kind of revisit some of the long-term liabilities and unfunded liabilities or potential risks that we identified as part of the long-term financial forecast. So, you know, as you all know, the deferred facility maintenance costs are you know, those costs are still there. We're certainly, kind of hitting it as best we can with the higher priority areas and building some facilities, but there's still quite a bit more to tackle in the future. Our labor agreements, once we enter into those agreements, those are obligations that we have to meet for the period of time, 2-3 years. So if the recession hits in the middle, then we'd have to reopen those agreements, and that's tough. again, you know, I talked about the silver tsunami and our expected future retiree payouts as a result of all those retirees that we're expecting. The dedicated sales tax is up for renewal or actually will be expiring in 2020. So I imagine we're probably going to be moving forward with the renewal of that tax measure, and it generates $10 million a year. So if we were to lose that, then it would significantly impact fire and police as well as infrastructure funding for our streets and neighborhoods. You know, there's always the potential loss of revenues from the state of Kansas now that they have a revised budget plan. You know, I think maybe that potential risk is diminished, but you never know. So the capital project debt financing policy, we presented back to you that our current mill level that's dedicated for our general obligation debt is going to sustain us for the next, you know, 4 or 5 years or so, but we need to keep our outstanding debt, or the amount we issue in debt annually, at the $12 to $15 million range. Otherwise, we're going to have to find additional resources to support that debt. We're constantly looking at and analyzing our health benefits fund, and that's because, you know, we have a lot of initiatives to attempt to reduce our claims. We are self-insured, and certainly, you know, what we're providing in terms of new initiatives is expected to reduce our claims, but there's always these unexpected claims that occur, and we need to make sure we have sufficient funds there to meet those obligations. The same goes with the workers' compensation fund. You know, we had the tragedies that occurred last year with our 2 police officers, and so that kind of put a kink in our funding plan for the workers' comp fund. But our plan, as proposed in the budget, is going to help to recover that fund back to a positive status. Constantly dealing with litigation and settlement costs that, you know, those are very difficult to anticipate and plan for. And then we would like to come up with an equipment replacement fund that in the future, when a piece of equipment ends its useful life, we would have the money there ready to pay for it. But we're not there yet. Right now, we're having to, you know, we're not necessarily setting money aside for future replacement costs. What we're doing is replacing on a pay-as-you-go basis. So now there's some additional risks and liabilities that we've been discussing, and so we've listed those here. The Caw Valley levies, right? And then the CDBG federal funding loss, we think potentially we'll lose that federal funding. You were presented a Parks Master Plan, and we need to identify ways to fund that master plan. And then, as you know, we have about $20 million in outstanding ADA compliance in infrastructure improvements to comply with ADA laws that we need to find funding for that as well. So lots of challenges, and that's why we're here to help our community and to address these challenges moving forward. Are there any more questions?
Commissioner Murguia.
Thank you. So I do have a little bit. First of all, I appreciate all the work staff has put into this presentation. It was a really good job, and it looks like it was a lot of work. I still need some more time to sort of get my hands around everything. It seems like just every year that I've been here, I learn a little bit more every year. It doesn't ever seem to stop. So I just really have a comment and then a request. So I think through the conversation we had tonight, we've all talked about how we'd all like to reduce the mill levy by more than 2 mills. But based on the budget that's been, the overall budget that's been presented tonight, based on the amount of money we have to do projects to actually improve our community being a very small amount, that's probably not likely. So what I would look at is if our ultimate goal, and it does appear that everybody up here is in agreement with this, is to get taxes as low as it can be. And I also think what we've come to an agreement on is the only way to do that is to grow our community. And Mayor, I think you said it best that when you said, unfortunately, the area that needs the most amount of growth is east of 635. And so in order so that we don't continue on this same trajectory for the next 10 years, where we're only able to reduce 2 mills and we're unable to get any sort of substantial momentum going to really make significant change in lowering taxes and improving our neighborhoods, I guess what I would like to know is, I'd like to hear from our administrator, not tonight, but at some point, please not tonight, on what projects are our staff working on east of 635 to grow our tax base? Now, I know, the mayor, you are working on the downtown healthy campus, and I know I am working on fast food business and have worked on grocery stores and other projects. So I know those two. But what else are we doing east of 635 to grow the tax base? Because even those two projects aren't going to provide enough momentum or enough impact in our county to reduce the mill to the level that all of our constituents can receive tax relief, and not just 45% of them, around that number. So I just want to know what we're working on. And I know that our staff already has a lot going on, but I think we really got to figure that out. Because if we have staff already so busy doing other things and no one's really focused on that area that needs the greatest amount of help, we're never going to get ourselves out of this cycle of these 1 and 2 mil decreases. So, Commissioner Walker, I really do appreciate your comments, and I really do want to see taxes go down, but there needs to be a concerted effort from what I've heard tonight. Everybody, including commissioners and staff, working together to grow our tax base. And I think we have to weigh that. I think counties across the country take a lot of criticism for the amount of incentive that they offer to businesses to locate in their county. But the reality is, I don't know of a county that doesn't offer incentive to businesses to come locate in their community. And what we also don't take into account is the ancillary benefits of bringing a business to our community, the jobs that it creates, the amenities it provides. So there are lots of ways to improve our community. I do want to see all of Wyandotte County grow, and when east of 635 grows, I think that west of 635 will experience that through growth and continued growth and tax relief. So I'd like to hear what we're doing east of 635 across the board from north to south that's going to grow our tax base.
Commissioner Walker and Philbrook.
I appreciate your comments. I think for me the question is, what is our definition going forward of grow our community mean? You know, having a project come in and the benefit, and I'm talking about the benefit to what we're doing to the government, to lower taxes, and then this goes to your incentive comment, is always deferred. It's 10 years down the road. And I think I don't have any, survey, within 1 or 2% verifiable. I've yet to meet anybody who comes up to me and on this subject that doesn't have the impression that we give tax abatement too freely, too generously, and too often. I understand that what tax abatement might mean to grow our community out west, especially now, is different than what it might mean at 10th and Quindaro because of the circumstances of why. I don't know how to make business people spend their money and come into the area east of 635 unless there are incentives. But when will we have done enough out west, and especially in the village areas, for a business to say, hey, I want to be out there because there's a lot of people out there, and yet they still want incentives? I mean, I really believe, you know, it may be good if I had a son that was born this year, maybe by the time he was an adult, the tax base would be sufficiently grown to be, but I haven't got that kind of time, folks. And the people that are talking to me are wanting some kind of tax growth, tax-based growth, and they're wanting tax relief now. They're not wanting it 10 years. That's all very good for the next generation, and we got to worry about them. But if we don't do something to help the people, I've had people tell me, why don't we just pay for the trash? We used to pay for trash, and now it's, what is it, 12, 15 bucks a month?
Yeah.
I can't even remember what it is on the utility. Why don't we pay for the trash? That'd be $144 back in the pocket of everybody that puts trash out on the curb. Another idea was, you know, why don't we reduce the pilot? My God, we're paying more pilot. State law only allows a 5% franchise on other utilities, but because of the way the Board of Public Utilities is created, we can go up to 15%. So I know there are people sitting at this table that know that when we adopted that, we said we would keep it in place for 3 years and then start reducing it. We have not reduced it a nickel. And as their revenues go up, our money continues to go up. I look at my utility bill. Last month, my pilot fee was $49, 49 or 52, I can't remember which. That's a lot of money to pay as an excise tax. I'm not sure where people want their tax reduction, whether you're as property owners, as electric utility users, or just, you know, something. I mean, picking up the trash for nothing would be something. That'd be 12 bucks off that utility bill. But you know, you can all say I'm not going to have to live with it next year because I'm not going to be here, but I'm telling you, I have not met anybody who says that we ought to spend more money on this or that. And they're not concerned, our taxpayers, about the hard decisions we got to make. And some of those decisions are going to be decisions we don't want to make. We can't do everything. We just can't. And if that's the objective, if 2% is it, 2% is it. But
it's actually 5%.
Well, if you add last year's.
Mills. No, it's 10% if you add last year's on the Kansas City, Kansas side. Because 2 plus 2 is 4, and that's 10% off the Kansas City, Kansas portion.
The number I saw up there, Mayor, my property went up about 5% or 6%. That's another thing. If 45% of the people's property stayed the same and the rest of them, I haven't met anybody. It's kind of like the voters. You never met anybody that ever voted against you. McKiernan, yours went down?
Yes, sir. Mine went down.
Wow. Well, I guess there are some people who went down.
We won't talk about mine, since it's half and half.
But what did I see for 5%? $23?
Yes.
I paid $22.95 the other night for my wife and I to eat Chinese. There's my tax reduction.
You don't let McCain go before me.
McCain go. Yeah. I'm saying the obvious. There ought to be something we can do to take care of the people in some way that benefits everybody. Everybody has their trash picked up. Almost everybody has electric and water utilities. Not everybody has pays property tax directly, although you pay it when you pay your rent, whether your landlord gives you the benefit of it. So,
Okay.
all right, I'm done.
Philbrook and McKiernan, Townsend.
Did you want to piggyback on him or on her?
I'll wait my turn.
Okay.
And then Kane?
So we were talking about improvement west and east, and oh doggone it, there's an in between. It's called the middle part of the city, which is District 8 and part of everybody else, pieces of it. And I would say that we are doing a pretty good job of slowly moving things east, and that the corridor, along the Turner Diagonal, is going to be busting at the seams soon, thanks to the new growth that's going on there with Amazon and so on. And then the next thing, of course, is the bad word, Indian Springs. But I think that the higher the challenge, the better the opportunity. And so with that growth around Indian Springs on the east and west side of 635 could really give us a real kick in the pants to move forward, because then people can see the better parts of us, not just way out west, but and we can keep pushing east and showing people that we can do the job. That's all.
Thank you. Commissioner McKiernan.
I just want to, as it relates to property tax, I want to say that Commissioner Murguia is 100% correct. The way that we're going to have to attack this is we're going to have to grow our valuation of buildings that pay taxes, and there's where people kind of get in a little bit of a rub. The fact is, right now, it's a seller's market, and if we want to grow our valuation, it's a long play. We have to give incentives. When we give incentives, it's important to remember we don't go backwards with those incentives. We simply don't go forwards as fast as we want to go. We have deferred or delayed some of that to get the amenity now, to build our community, to make it stronger, because, and I'll get back to my flip side, but we have to remember our Economic Development Office brought us a report about 6 months ago, which was the incentives that had completed, IRB, TIF, and I forget what, CID. IRB, TIFs, and
CID.
I think it was CID.
Was it CIDs as well?
Anyway. Face value. NRA.
NRA, thank you. That's what it was. So anyway, they brought us the report of those programs, those incentives that had now completed their run. And the completion of those incentives, generated 10 years ago, netted about $3 million more in terms of tax revenue for us. So it's a long play. We don't go backwards with the incentive. We simply don't go forward as fast as we want and as we need. But the flip side of that, which in my mind is just as critical, especially east of 635, is we can't lose the value we already have. And to my mind, that is the importance of the SOAR initiative and how we cannot allow those properties that are already here to slide to the point where they lose value, or worse yet, to the point where we have to tear them down. And unfortunately, I can tell you just from my district, we tore down last year properties that had an aggregate value of $500,000. $500,000, and all of a sudden it's vacant lots and we don't have that money anymore. We've got to find a way to reduce the blight and stop the slide of those properties toward demolition. So those two things together, incenting new development and maintaining the valuation we already have, in my mind, are the two things that get us to where we need to go to really significantly lower that mill rate in the future.
Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you. During the administrator's presentation last Thursday, part of it included an announcement about adding to the staff in the Economic Development Department, which has taken a major hit with the losses this year. And I held the question then, but I think the way the discussion has turned here now, it'd be appropriate to ask it. I'm wondering exactly what type of position that will be. Will it be someone, outreach was the word used, who will simply monitor the phone and tell people who may call what's available here, or will it be a professional who will be able to go out and actively recruit and try to encourage the development, just as this discussion has talked about, in areas of the city, ideally east of 635, and I think that would, I hope, be taken into consideration when we're looking for this individual, what kind of marketing or experience they've had with doing that. That hits all of the points that have just been discussed about raising value, getting people to come in and develop east of 635. So that's really my question. How do we envision this particular position? What are we looking for? What are the qualities in that position that we're looking for?
The initiative they had toward the small business liaison was really one that was, I will say, finds its roots from what we hear from a lot of small businesses within the community today that have expressed difficulty when they want to expand their business or grow their business, of coming here and being able to work through some of the process and procedures. So more so directed toward when somebody comes into our planning and zoning process. As we've often heard, you have larger businesses, larger companies come in. They're usually able to hire somebody that's a professional that takes them through that process. If you come in, if you're a small business, and a small business doesn't mean somebody that just has something little. I mean, this could be $1 million business, but they're not big enough to have the hired staff on or whatever, so they come through our process. Our planning and zoning, which I think you get feedback on that is negative, but I'll say is positive, that they turn and they hand them a list of regulations and say, this is what you need to go through in order to get this done. That's fairly daunting to somebody that's never done that before, and the emphasis behind the liaison is one where they can come in, somebody would say, this is what I want to do, so they would have the expertise within the planning and zoning process, but set outside of that regulatory area for us. It's charged with enforcing it the way we have directed them to enforce it. They'd set over in the economic development side of that equation to be able to take them in and go, okay, this is what you need to do. Or if there's something that they're not doing right, they can say, well, if you modify this or change this, you'll be able to get through and get your small business started. So that's the initiative from there. It's from those that are already in our community looking to grow or do more business here that may have been stopped just because they can't figure out how to get through the process. Or, I mean, they may look for different programs or such that we have in EcoDevo, but that's really not my directive. It's to move somebody through that's willing to, they're not coming in looking for the incentive, they're just looking for the path and the procedure to get it done. And I've received a lot of that feedback from you all's commissioners. I've received that feedback from citizens of the community. So that's the area that I'm going forward with this new position. And if you want it redirected or such, then I would be open to hear where that is, but that's my direction.
Well, that gives me a better understanding of what it is. You're right, I have heard how complicated it can be for small business owners to move through the maze, so I do see that there is a need for such a department. I think of Mr. Brockman working on that with the $50,000 fund to grow and enhance, so I know he's done some of that as well. I would also say when we look to hire professionals in economic development, the next time we do to really consider people who can actively outreach, not just the ones who can help those who come to us. I think that will tie in with the outcomes that I expect to hear and to be implemented with the Northeast Plan. I think that would be a big help. You know, clone another Murguia or something like that, or some others out there. So, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Kane.
Thank you, Mayor. And I've been down the line, so you've talked quite a bit about some stuff, but I bet you I didn't have a dozen people where their taxes went down. But the hardest thing for me to explain is somebody has a 10-year-old home, 2 lots down, they build a brand-new home, and their stuff goes up $5,000 because it happened to somebody I know. So what might look good to some folks doesn't look good to us, and it's extremely hard when the house is much smaller and everybody's taxes go up, and then how do you explain that? And I know we're doing what we can, but that's one of the hardest things for me to explain. And I really can't explain it, you know, and I can't explain it to myself since it happened to me. And when we talk about District 1, remember District 1, 20 some odd years ago, employed more people that, I mean, they were everywhere. And I know that we started this a long time ago when there's just 3 of us still here trying to get jobs down there, and we've done that. But I'd like to pursue higher paying jobs down there. And I think we've got a golden opportunity because General Motors is just going to get bigger. I know they're on a layoff now, but eventually the crew will come back. But we need to start getting manufacturing down there. And then we need to say, okay, folks, we have housing for you. And if you look at where my mother and father-in-law live on Grandview Boulevard, they live on the older side of the street, and the other side of the street's beautiful. And that's what we need. We need more of that. When you drive up and down Quindaro, you see it. It's growing, just not at a rate that we want. And I think we need to keep pushing forward for Honda and all the folks, because I got a KBI phone call today for Ann, and the lady was asking me a bunch of questions. I said, I don't want to tell you, just go look at her district. So we as a commission, like we did last Thursday, where we all stuck together, we didn't want something. I think we need to all stick together to make this a better place. And I'm very proud to say somebody, I don't just work here, I live here, and I play here. And I think that's huge, that we need to stick together to get this done and grow all 4 corners of the community. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Bynum.
It speaks to a lot of what I've already heard tonight with regard to growing the community and growing all 4 corners of the community. I like the small business liaison position. I'd like to see that position or someone in economic development work with us on the creation of incentives that specifically support entrepreneurs and our local small business owners. And work with them to be able to tap the current incentive packages that we offer when someone is coming to do business with us, and let them have access to those same incentives and opportunities. And I have talked about this before. We have many local small business owners that might want that same opportunity to have the chance to grow their business and grow their own personal wealth and grow their wage. So I'd like to just throw that out as an option within economic development. I'd like us as a commission, as we work together, to discuss what are all of the economic development tools and incentives that are available. Perhaps that's during the fall strategic planning session. I would like that to include, how do our economic development tools and incentives complement those that I know are offered by the BPU and any other entity, the state of Kansas? How are those incentive packages working together? I know that there are other entities here offering incentives. I'd like to know what they are and how do they complement what we offer. And last, I would just like to ask if we could consider what I call transparency and economic development, or TED.
That sounded personal.
I see it as a one-page fact sheet for the projects that come forward. I see it as an explanation on that project of, you know, everything we can fit on one page, but every incentive that we're offering, what's the potential return, including those that Commissioner Murguia, you spoke of, the ancillary returns that are possible because we do a package that has incentives. On the backside, we could provide the glossary of what do these terms mean. I do that more for the transparency piece of it because we do deal a lot in incentives. And I think it leaves, again, the general public unclear and unsure of what it is we're proposing. So it just seems to me that a simple one-page fact sheet on projects could be available with every project that comes forward that just lays all that out. So
I think that's a great idea, and I think the other thing about incentives that we need to think about, because we've been very aggressive, and I think we need to continue to be very aggressive. I think Commissioner McKiernan said it well. We don't move backwards. We don't take money out of the general fund to give to companies. That never happens because we don't have it to give. Fact, the project has to generate its own incentive. They say, what's the best time to plant a tree? The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time to plant a tree is today. And you think about the General Motors incentives that were given in the 80s. People lost their minds. And they have been the number one taxpayer in our community ever since. And we waited 20 years for those incentives to burn off, but thank goodness they had the foresight to plant that tree 20 years ago because of the highest paying manufacturing jobs we have in our community, and they're the number one taxpayer in our community. And they are attracting all kinds of manufacturing around them. So that investment, people lost their mind over and thought it was crazy, gave away an airport, gave major incentives, and it was a major economic engine that is still paying dividends today. The Star bonds, 15 years we waited for that sales tax to burn off. All came from the project itself. Now we have $12 million in new revenue, but more than that, we have $20-some million in property taxes paid out there and 11,000 new jobs. All of it generated by the project itself, which wasn't there before. Amazon, 10-year incentives, the shortest incentive time ever. And when that pays off in just 10 years, it's going to be a 15 to 20% bump in the total valuation of the Turner School District. I mean, that's a monumental increase for that school district, and it's a huge bump for our whole community. So when you look at this, I think there's a difference between a corporate giveaway and an incentive. And the incentives have to match proportional with the impact it's going to have. And we have to be aggressive with them, because if we had not been aggressive with Amazon, it wouldn't be here. If we hadn't been aggressive and innovative with Star Bonds, the Legends wouldn't be here. And all of the value that we see from them wouldn't be here. So we've been aggressive. We have inherited a community that's been historically aggressive, and we're reaping the benefits of some of that with General Motors and now the Star Bonds. And we are continuing that legacy of attracting businesses with jobs and value that are going to grow the total valuation of our city over time. And that's where we need to make 10 and 20-year decisions up here, not just 2 and 4-year decisions. 2 and 4-year decisions are better rewarded by voters. 20-year decisions are better for the community. And that's the commitment that I have, and I think the commitment that this commission has had. This commission has been very forward-thinking. And in every, I don't want to say every, 95% of the incentives we've offered, it's been unanimous, because the deal has shown that it's going to pay for itself and benefit the community. And we disagree now and again on an incentive, but by and large, when there's a significant incentive, Amazon, unanimous. General Motors was unanimous. The Star Bonds, unanimous. I mean, all those big investments were unanimous because it was so clear the long-term benefit of the community. So we're going to need to plant some more trees for that next generation, and we're reaping the benefits now. Commissioner Johnson?
Yes, Mayor. I also, in this spirit of this whole discussion in terms of growing the eastern part of Wyandotte County, I hear talking about discussion about General Motors and the things that are going on down in Fairfax. I think that we need to add to the discussion the employment of our people in those good paying jobs.
That's right.
As part of how we figure out how to incent or not, how do we incent, and I don't know what's the best way to term that. But we need to make sure that if in fact we have the second highest wage earning potential in the state, that our people are being prepped and eligible to get some of those jobs as well.
Right.
I just want to add that to the mix of discussion, because that's going to also help us to grow Wyandotte County as well, particularly for persons that are living in the eastern corridor of Wyandotte County, that we can increase their quality of life as well as part of this discussion. Thank you.
And Commissioner, if I can just add to that, the housing piece, we have to have quality workforce housing, because if we do all of our work and get someone in our community a job that didn't have a job before, in many cases they're taking that first paycheck to another community to buy a house. And we need to have the housing here that people want to invest in, so that we have the people with these jobs and turning those dollars over in our community again and again. We've got to grow our housing stock. We have to do it all. We have to do it all, but that is an excellent point. Commissioner Philbrook?
Thank you for bringing up the workforce part of it. There's 3 people sitting here on the commission that are involved in workforce partnership, which is played a big part in helping line up people for the new jobs at Amazon. And I would say that workforce partnership has been one of the best kept secrets in Wyandotte County until recently, until we pulled them in kicking and struggling and said, listen, we expect you to do the job for us that we need, and that is to see that people are educated for these jobs that we need. And so they've been working really hard with our colleges and with District 500 and Turner districts, all of it, to try to create those pipelines. So we have people really working hard now that weren't working together as little as 10 years ago. And they are really working together, and I am so proud of our community. I just don't know what to say. So I want to see all these new jobs come forward.
All right, we have a couple more items on our agenda tonight. I aspire to be done by 8. So I'm just putting that out there. Mr. Bach?
I'm going to assume, Mayor, that we've had the mill rate discussion as you've had. I mean, that was brought up, so I believe we've covered that the way you want to. Local food sales tax, this was an issue brought forward by Commissioner Walters, where he's asked us questions on research about this. What would it take if we were to, could we go out and eliminate the sales tax on food or grocery items within our city? So we've looked at that. I think it's an initiative that would be very nice, be very good for our community, especially people, encourage them to spend more in that area to get good, healthy foods. However, in looking at it, it appears we are at the obstacle that it is one of those items that legislatively we do not have the authority to do. And I'm going to ask Ken Moore, Chief Counsel, to explain that as you've gone through and done your research on that.
Yes, we've looked at the Kansas statutes on the authority to impose a sales tax, and also the distinctions that you can make in doing so. The problem is that we have by the Kansas Constitution what's called a home rule authority to govern our own affairs, as long as it's not, we can't exempt ourselves out of a statute that's uniformly applicable to all cities. And the statutes the state has enacted, it gives us the authority to impose a sales tax, but it also has different classifications and exceptions in the statute where sales tax is not applicable. For example, you don't pay sales tax on, for lack of a better word, food stamp purchases. But those things are uniformly applicable, and we can't add new exemptions to those statutes. So having a wholesale exclusion of the sales tax on food stamps, we're not authorized to do that. We can impose a tax, but it has to be on all sales tax across the county, and that would require an election of the people to do that, or to change the tax. That's why when Kathleen mentioned the dedicated sales tax, to reinstate that, it requires an election. It's not something that the commission can do on its own.
Mr. Moore has provided me with a legal opinion on that today. I will forward that to all of you so you have it officially in hand in response to that.
Commissioner Bynum?
just to clarify, if I heard correctly, we don't have the authority to exempt tax on a singular item.
Only the categories that are included in the state statute,
Okay.
and there are like 90 of those. It goes to section triple L, or
And-
no, quadruple L.
And food's not one of those 90.
The only thing for food is for essentially food stamps.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Walters, do you have any questions about that?
No.
It was a great thought.
Well, I'll see the opinion when he gets it. I'm certainly not an attorney, but I don't know that that was the intent of the state law, but evidently that's the result of it. But
I would like to see the state, I mean, the state has continued to increase sales tax. I would like to see the state not increase sales tax on food. Many states don't. We have about state of Kansas has about the highest sales tax on food of anyone in the country. And that's very regressive and hurts the poor more than anyone else.
And I'll say, Commissioner, we'll continue to look around and see if there's any loophole, anything else through the state to it. But as of right now, it looks like that's not within our authority today.
And that's the Department of Commerce that regulates that, or at the state?
It's the legislature.
Legislature.
Okay, the last item on our agenda tonight was a request by Commissioner McKernan to discuss potential CDBG future funding. I don't know that it was about what we have today, but I think it was about the high probability that it'll go away, and it is one of those cautionary things we have in our future outlook to note that someday we're either going to not have that revenue or need to replace it with general fund dollars.
And I only wanted to bring this up. I remember in the first budget that I went through, it occurred to me that if we really value the things we spend CDBG money on, given the volatility of those funds and the downward trend over time, if we really value what we purchase with those dollars, we should find a way to shift that spending away from CDBG, away from that volatility. And I think that holds even more true today. So I think it would be wise for us to evaluate how we spend CDBG dollars and determine what of those allocations are our highest priority, and then consider how we might shift those from CDBG to general fund over the coming years so that we continue to get the benefits that we're currently getting. And it's nothing for this year's budget.
I will note that within the 2018 budget, we have moved all our funding from a demolition perspective into the general fund. So two benefits from that. I guess one is focusing on, that's something somewhat of a core service to clean up neighborhoods as you go through it. It's a initiative from SOAR as we're working there, that if we're going to go after structures. Two, I think that'll help us a little bit with the layers of regulation we go through from HUD. By if we demo one structure within our community with HUD regulations, it layers in a whole different thing across everything we do, whether we use HUD in it or not.
All right. That, Commissioner Townsend?
Since we've used the CDBG acronym, this is one question. Does this budget continue to provide for
emergency home repair?
Emergency home repair, thank you. Yes.
Mr. Bach?
I believe that came before the committee, just a week ago, so.
Yes.
Okay, same level of funding? Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of tonight's agenda. You can see the future workshop items. I think we do need to add libraries in there. Is the one that I heard today that we need to add. If there's is there anything else that we need to, if there is anything else, and if you think of it later, be sure to reach out to my office, any commissioner, if you have additional topics that you would like, and we'll get them where I'll work with the administrator to make sure that those get worked into the queue so we can get through any questions anyone has. All right. Mr. Bach, do you have anything else?
Was Project CISA 635 to be a workshop topic or something at a different special session later?
That's a good question. Do you want that in the budget, during the budget time, or do you want it looking forward in the fall?
I'd like to see it during one of our budget workshops. It shouldn't be very lengthy.
Okay.
I mean, do you think it should be very
Well,
lengthy?
and I think responding to you, as you were asking what we're doing, what projects are working on that we can talk about
Yeah,
now.
what's on the burner? What are you working on, just in general?
Okay.
Great. All right. Seeing no further items, we are adjourned. Thank you.